Hi, I'm Jeremy Pomeroy. I'm a PhD scientist here at the Marshall Clinic Research Institute working on BBS. I want to thank everyone who watched the presentation that I gave recently talking about sleep and sedentary time, and I want to answer a couple of the questions that I got in response to that. So the first question that I got was about what types of things to do to interrupt sedentary time during the day, specifically during the middle of the day, and then also sometimes specifically as it gets closer to bedtime, because I talked about physical activity just before bedtime. So I think, one of the first things in relation to trying to change behavior, like interrupting sitting time or moving more during the day, one of the things that can make it a lot easier is to make the change to be as small as possible relative to the things that people are already doing. So, for example, taking anything that we currently do where we're sitting and trying to change that to add some activity to it. So, an example would be doing something like watching TV or listening to the radio or listening to a podcast where instead of doing it seated either the entire time or, being seated at all, is to instead to stand, to move around, anything like that. I think, one of the things that is kind of a silver lining of COVID-19 is that, in some places, in some parts of the world, people were confined to their homes for a period of time. And so we've had to learn how to be physically active, not just outside of our homes, but how to be more physically active inside our homes. And we can kind of take some of the things that people learn to do there, walking, doing laps in the house and things like that. And that can be something that, can be done while listening to a podcast or listening to anything on the radio or anything like that. And so, so that's one example. Some of the other things that I talked about too that in my presentation are doing things like setting a timer to remind yourself every 15 minutes, get up and move. That can be another way to help interrupt sedentary time during the day. And then also, the question I got had specifically about towards the nighttime. And I think, a lot of the things to interrupt sedentary time during the day also apply to at night. It doesn't really matter, except that one of the things that I talked about in my presentation, and I want to emphasize again, is the importance of trying to keep exercise activity that's closer to bedtime to be more light intensity or more moderate intensity, and not to do really high intensity exercise, the kind of exercise that causes very heavy breathing, sweating particularly. That's a good marker that it's too intense, because when we sweat, it's because our body temperature rises, and having a body temperature that rises then just prior to going to bed can make it harder to fall asleep and to stay asleep. So, a lot of times people, we do tend to reduce our activity a little bit towards the evening, towards the time we're getting ready to go to bed. That's a time that's common to, watch TV, listen to something, podcast, something like that. And just to do those things instead of doing them seated, to do them standing, to try to move around a bit while you're doing it. And, to take breaks during it, either, if you're watching something that's broadcast that still has commercials, during the commercial breaks, get up and move around. If you're, watching something on Netflix or a streaming service or something like that, pause it and get up and move around, like I said, every 15 minutes, certainly before that 20 minutes of uninterrupted sitting time has passed. I hope these ideas are helpful. And, again, if any questions remain about this or anyone would like any specific advice, feel free to reach out, and Sonia can get us in touch. I had another question that was about metabolic tests that are recommended for people with BBS. And, I think There are, potentially metabolic tests that your individual doctor or your medical team might recommend, and that I think is between you and your medical team. And so I don't want to, I'm not going to really talk about any of those, but I'm going to talk about kind of some tests that might be helpful, outside of that. And, there's nothing that I think is necessarily required. I don't, some of these tests can be hard to find or can be expensive, or both. And so I don't want to create pressure to get into these tests. But, the one test that came to mind when I got this question was a resting metabolic rate, or an RMR. What that measures is the energy expenditure that someone has during the rest. And that can be a good way to get a gauge of diet and dietary intake for weight loss or weight maintenance. We can estimate resting metabolic rate as well, and the estimates can vary in terms of how accurate they are, and so that's why actually getting a test that measures it can be helpful. But I want to emphasize that it's not necessary. That people can still work on weight loss or weight maintenance without necessarily getting one of these tests, and just tracking weight periodically or daily can be another way to assess how well your dietary intake is matching your energy expenditure. I think that the way that the resting metabolic rate tests are conducted can vary a little bit. The way that we do them for research is either to have someone rest while they're either breathing into a mask or under a hood. And what we're doing is we're capturing the carbon dioxide that they're exhaling. And from that carbon dioxide, we can calculate how much energy they're expending. There's other tests that do the same thing, but have someone actually sitting in a room, that the room is designed to be able to measure the carbon dioxide that someone sitting in that room is exhaling. There are other types of tests that also measure carbon dioxide production that you maybe just breathe into a little tube, into a device. Usually those are after a shorter period of rest. And some of the different tests can vary a little bit in their accuracy. But, for the most part, the gold standard of these tests is ones that measure carbon dioxide production. And so, academic centers, research labs, if a local university has an exercise physiology lab, sometimes they'll do those and you have to pay. And sometimes they're looking for participants either to teach students how to do the tests or as part of research studies, and that can be one way to have this test done for free. Some dietitians will do it, but again, I just want to emphasize that this test can be helpful, but I don't feel like it's something that anyone needs to stress out about getting if it's just not feasible or doesn't seem feasible. So those were the two questions that I had that were about physical activity, sleep, and metabolic tests. I had two other questions that I want to mention and acknowledge that we got these questions, and they were about diet, and specifically diet for people with BBS and in relation to kidney disease. And I want to defer answering those questions to Tammy Timler, the dietitian in the BBS Center, because that's much more her area of expertise than it is mine. And I'm sure she can answer those questions much, much better than I could. But I also just wanted to make sure that the person who asked those questions knows that we got those questions and we will work on addressing them. Thank you.